Hello and welcome. Thank you for attending our webinar. We really appreciate it. Thank you, Amberly, for that introduction. My name is Bronson. I'm the Director of Content at Awardco, and I'll be facilitating the conversation as we dive in. And just as a reminder, the Employee Journey and Total Rewards is the title of our webinar. It's increasing retention, engagement, and happiness at every stage. And as we dive in, we want to provide a bit of a reminder that total rewards can mean many different things for many different HR leaders. What we're going to be focusing on today is the recognition and engagement aspect of total rewards and how that can impact every stage of the journey. So I want to introduce, or help introduce, our two speakers here today, Laura Shanley and Christy Gilhoy. Sorry about that, Christy. I should have prepared to say your last name beforehand. But both of them work together, and they have worked together on many different projects. They've worked at Okta and Qualcomm, and they've helped their engagement strategies improve and do all sorts of things like that. So I would love to have you both introduce yourselves. Laura, if we could start with you.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I'm happy to be here. I'm Laura Shanley, and I have spent the last almost, 19 years in the employee engagement, employee communications, employee experience space. And specifically in the last 5 years, I've really been focused on employee recognition. And so that's been a really fulfilling experience. And it's really fun to see companies build their culture of recognition. And so I've worked with several companies to develop, create, implement, transform recognition programs. And that's what I'm currently doing, is doing consulting in this space.
That's great. Thank you so much for that introduction. I'm sure we'll get more into your experience as the webinar goes on. I have a couple of specific questions about what you've seen over the last few years in employee recognition. But thank you for that introduction. Christy, how about yourself? Would you mind introducing yourself?
Sure, and you did great on the name. It's Christy Gilhoy. So glad to be here. I have an extensive career in employee engagement and experience and recognition. I like to think of myself as kind of a Willy Wonka of the employee experience, really thinking about ways you can build culture and delight people and make them feel seen and heard and valued in terms of who they are outside of their work as well. And so I've been so fortunate to partner with Laura on culture initiatives, communication initiatives, global initiatives to really support the employee experience. And I do think so much of the secret of that experience is that recognition piece. And I'm really excited to talk about how to weave that recognition into every part of the employee journey today.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for that introduction. We are so excited to have you both with us. Thank you for sharing your time and all of your talents. We really appreciate it. And for all of our attendees here, we want to make sure that you feel part of the conversation as well. So please pipe into the Q&A or into the attendee chat. I'm actually looking at those live, so I'll be able to present those questions to Laura and Christy so that we can make this a discussion and we can make sure that we get the most value out of this for all of your time. So as we move on, like Laura and Christy said, we want to make sure that we focus on the employee recognition side of things and how that relates to engagement and how that can pull people into the entire employee journey. And as an HR leader, it's been an exercise in adapting to change the last several years. It's constant pivoting is the name of the game to stay afloat. And there's a little bit of a metaphor. This may not land as well as I thought it might have, but like a catboat in a hurricane, to kind of introduce this and all of the challenges that you all have been dealing with over the last several years. And really, I mean, HR is an exercise in change anyway. But a catboat in a hurricane, that is an old phrase from the turn of the 20th century. A catboat is just a small sailboat, and they were really ubiquitous at the time. But there was a very common phrase to say, well, this is unbalanced. It's like a catboat in a hurricane. And I don't mean to say that HR is just always unbalanced. It's not. It's just a very strong exercise in how to make sure you adapt to all those changes quickly. And along with that, I would like to ask everyone here on the webinar, what challenges are you facing? Please pipe into the Q&A. Let us know. And so Laura and Christy can address those. But I do have a question for both Laura and Christy. And Laura, we'll start with you. As you both as your careers have spanned this space, what are some of the big challenges that you've seen HR leaders face? Maybe some of the top 2 or 3 challenges you've seen them face over the last 5 years.
Yeah, well, I think like probably many people who are putting in the chat, we're seeing People need to do more with less, right? Like there's the reductions. That's really difficult on an organization. But I would say, related to recognition, it's been really heartening for me to see that more leaders, or at least those that I've been communicating with, are really seeing the value in recognition and really seeing how impactful that can be in these difficult times.
Yeah, wonderful. And thank you for that. We're getting some comments here as well. Change fatigue is one that a lot of HR leaders, specifically Sarah, that piped into the chat, said that change fatigue is an issue, or retention is a big issue, things like that. Just what you highlighted there. And Christy, I wonder what your thoughts are in this area as well.
As I think about that, I think about the phrase, what got you here won't get you there. I think change fatigue is real, but it's really about change management as well. I've seen a lot of work with the generations, right? As you have leaders who are baby boomers and Gen Xers, what they think of as recognition or what they think of as a meaningful career may not be what millennials and Gen Z, who's just coming into the workforce, feels. And so the rules have changed, the pace has changed, the scale and scope has changed. We've become so much more global, multicultural, focused more on diversity. So I think it's been really important to take a pause and think about what works in today's environment, which may be very, very different than 3 years, 5 years, 10 years ago.
Yeah, wonderful. That brings up what we're hearing here in the chat. Lori said that how to engage employees when their feedback becomes a reality and they're still not participating. And maybe that has something to do with what you just mentioned, is that there is just a change in leadership. What one person expects might not be what the other expects, and so there's a lot of different things to address there. There's also a lack of employee accountability. Glenn said that in the chat as well. And so there's just a lot of different changes going on, and maybe the point is to just adapt to that change and see how we can do that. So thank you for sharing those challenges. Please keep them coming, and we'll have Laura and Christy address those. But here's just a little bit of an example of some things that you might be dealing with. Retention, like Mickey said in the chat, employee engagement, professional development, turnover, growth, layoffs, benefits administration. There's just a lot that you as HR leaders have to deal with. And there's a lot outside of that you have to deal with, as with individuals and what they're struggling with. And things are challenging. We just want to paint that picture a little bit. They're challenging perhaps more than ever. This is a stat from Deloitte. This year they did a study that said only 23% of employees believe that their leaders have the capability necessary to manage in a disrupted, boundaryless world. That's a worrying stat. And I wonder, Laura and Christy, what commentary might you have on that? That this seems to me like, at least from this study, and it's not like it doesn't mean that comprehensively this is what employees are feeling, but maybe there's a little bit of a concern that employees don't feel like their leaders have the capabilities necessary to lead in a world like this. What do you both think about that?
Well, yeah, I just think, yeah, it's tough. Like seeing that stat and that sentiment, it's a tough time. It's a tough time right now. And it makes me think also, wow, managers really get the brunt of this, the feedback when it comes to when employees aren't happy. And I think we'll talk about it later, just how important managers are, and how I really feel like we all could do a better job at really supporting those managers, and that really could go a long way. Yeah, very interesting. Christy, do you have anything to add to that?
I think there's maybe some honesty that needs to be taken into account, that we're in unprecedented times. We've talked about that, right? No one really has the magic answer. And so when Glenn says, lack of employee accountability, and Laura says we need to help with managers, I think there's a lot of creativity opportunities, thought leadership opportunities, trial and error. I think we're trying things. I think there's a lot of room for innovation and new solutions that we may not have tried before. On the one hand, and on the other hand, there's just some really basic pieces that if managers are connecting with their employees on a consistent basis, if they're really recognizing the good work that they're doing, I mean, these are time-tested, age-old human needs that we can draw on in crazy times of change fatigue to make sure that we're aligned with our employees and seeing them as people and understanding their needs, because there really are a lot of unknowns right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of a psychological principle that's pretty popular, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And in times of change, like, people tend to go, the hierarchy's in a triangle, right? And then if you don't have your base needs fulfilled, then you can't go to the next levels. But in times of change, people tend to go down to the next one. They're like, okay, this is what I need to take care of now. And you're absolutely right, both of you, Christy and Laura, what you said, that it's very difficult for managers to be able to deal with that, especially in times where there's a lot of remote work, there's a lot of disengagement happening, there's a lot of just worries in general. I mean, we have a couple more stats here from the same study that 57% of employees might leave their jobs for a better manager. This highlights exactly what you mentioned, Laura, that managers have a difficult time. It's a tough job to be able to do their job and help other people succeed. And then this other stat also from Deloitte, that leaders account for 70% of the variance in employee engagement scores. Basically, that means that leaders are one of the most important factors in employee engagement. Just like you both highlighted, Laura and Christy, that it's a very challenging time. So what are some ways that you as leaders can make employee engagement something that is beneficial and it's growing in your organization? We want to talk a little bit more about that and have Laura and Christy share your expertise with us. So good leaders create better companies, better teams, and better outcomes. But the best leaders create all that while focusing on the entire employee journey. So like we mentioned at the beginning, we are going to talk about the employee journey and how employee recognition plays into that and helps with engagement. The total rewards, as we mentioned in the title of this, encompasses so much. It encompasses benefits, it encompasses all kinds of things. And we want to focus on how recognition, which is such a simple step, can have tangible benefits for you. So moving forward into here are the 5 steps of the employee journey. And Christy, I wonder if you might address these 5 steps. Depending on who you talk to, the employee journey can be very different. But is there anything you might add here to the employee journey, or even take away, or do you feel like this is a pretty accurate representation of it?
It's an accurate representation. I think you can build some of these out when you think about recruitment in terms of the candidate experience, right? Or when someone leaves the company, the alumni experience, right? How are they reflecting back about their experience in the company? Yeah. I think these are the big milestones, and then there's a lot of things that weave in and out of here. For example, how are people talking about their career outside of the company, right? What's happening with the Glassdoors and the Indeeds, and how are people showing up outside of work to talk about their work? How are they talking about their work or their company in their social circle with their family? But yeah, I think this is a good overview of the journey.
Yeah, that's a very interesting point. How do you think that managers and leaders can address that aspect of the employee journey that happens outside of that? Because looking at these 5 steps, these are pretty traditional. These are what most HR leaders focus on for good reason. There's a lot of benefits to this. But what you mentioned about the employee journey encompassing things outside of the workplace, how might an HR leader or a leader address that within the workplace? Because you can't control everything, and nor should you try. But what are some ways you can address that?
Yeah, I think as we look at some of the thought leaders today, like when people listen to Brene Brown and she talks about vulnerability and that connection and seeing the whole person. And so I think the most successful managers that I've seen and I've worked for have understood that if there are milestones that I'm going through as an employee, if I'm going through a family change or a family loss or a time where I really want to grow my career or work on a specific skill, if my manager is walking with me through those changes, through those times in my life, and understands how to best coach me and help me be the best person that I am in that environment, that just breeds so much loyalty across my journey. And I would say even the best managers would help your employees or get a job outside of your department, even outside of your company. If you're truly interested in the development of someone's career and who they are as a whole person, it's not just about the task that they're in at this moment. And that pays dividends. We're all moving so quickly. We're moving to different jobs, different companies. Just Laura and I have worked together in so many different incarnations, right? And so keeping those relationships across your career benefits you as a person and as a leader as you move across your own career.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you for that insight. That addresses actually a question that popped in from Michael. What do you think about the difference between what the employee may think should be recognized versus what management may think is important? And you mentioned like a manager walking with an employee side by side, but I'll read the question one more time just so we can all get it. What do you think about the difference between what the employee may think should be recognized versus what management may think it is important? Christy, what do you think about that? And Laura, I would love your thoughts on this as well.
Well, I think there's always a little bit of tension here in terms of people thinking, well, and then some of this is generational. Well, I don't want to just thank someone for showing up to their job, right? Doing their job. Laura and I talk about a lot, what gets recognized gets repeated. So I think as a manager, what you're looking for in your employee is what are the things that your employer is doing in a job performance role that you want to see more of. Catch them doing something good. And so I think you need to connect it to the company's values, to the job role, to successes and wins in the organization. And if you start a pattern of recognizing those things frequently, we're talking weekly, when you see something, say something about good work, that's going to help the employee know, okay, that's more of what my manager wants. And I would also challenge everyone to do that leading up. You know, if your manager does a great meeting with you, a one-on-one, or if your SVP does a great presentation and shows a lot of humility, or does something that you would like more of in that manager, to call it out. So I think everyone wants to be recognized. I think the stats are people need that once a week, which seems like a lot. So I don't think you can over-recognize if it's genuine and it's based on their job performance.
Yeah, incredible insights. Thank you. Laura, what would you add to that?
Yeah, I think that's great, Christy. And I think you touched on it, but I think that recognition programs are a really great opportunity to reinforce your culture and your values, and making sure that people know what those expectations are, right? So when you talk about, you know, what a manager wants to recognize for, well, that should be what, you know, the company sets out as, this is our culture, these are our values, these are the behaviors that we want to see that support living these values, right? So as managers are recognizing for that, it presents an opportunity also for even others outside of that individual recognition, right? So if I'm recognizing Bronson and Christy observes that, then she sees, oh, okay, that's what we're doing here. That is a good, you know, thing to do, or as Christy said, what gets recognized gets repeated. And then I think on the other hand, when we think about, you know, what the employee wants to be recognized for, right? And you presented that as maybe those are different things. I would say, you know, it's a great opportunity for managers to ask, hey, what's important to you? You know, how do you like to be recognized? Is it okay if I recognize you in front of a group? Would you rather if I recognize you in our one-on-one meeting? What, you know, if I was to, you know, do you like plaques? Do you prefer, you know, some sort of experience? I mean, it's just it's an opportunity to connect with your employees and your teams and see what's important to them, because I think there's nothing wrong with tailoring your recognition and the way that you manage tailored to what's important to other people. I think that's what makes a really good manager.
Yeah, wonderful. And it's incumbent on the manager to at least know a little bit about the person, or to ask, like you said, how do you like to be recognized? I mean, I've spoken with so many HR leaders that are like, I don't know how to recognize, or I feel awkward doing it. It feels disingenuous. But you can just ask, and that shows genuine interest anyway. Like, how do you like to be recognized so I can do that better, you know? And that's just a wonderful way to keep doing that. And Christy, you brought up something that we're going to talk about a little bit later, but I want to circle back to it when we do, and later on in the presentation here, about how you can't have too much recognition, and sometimes that can be a little overwhelming. Like, Oh my goodness, how am I going to recognize somebody once a week? I mean, there are stats out there that say those who are recognized more often, like once a week, have like an incredible amount of engagement, way more than their peers. And it's tangible and it's proven. And so like, how can HR leaders do that when there's so many other things going on? And we'll come back to that as we do that. So there's a couple more questions coming in, which we will get to, but we just want to hit on that the best leaders utilize a thoughtful total reward strategy, specifically with recognition at every step of the journey. And that's what we're going to talk about how to impact the total rewards journey at every step. And one way to immediately do that and to very easily do that, often without any increases in budget and all that other kind of thing, it's employee recognition, like we've been talking about for this whole webinar here. Employee recognition has all of these benefits. This is from Deloitte and from Gallup, 2 studies that they've recently done. It can lower voluntary turnover by as much as 31%, increase productivity and performance, increase employee loyalty, improve employee engagement, and much more. And these are all very tangible things that benefit the business, and there are also things outside of this that benefit individuals on an individual basis that help them. So there is recognition at every stage. We want to talk a little bit about that, and as we dive into that, I want to kind of address some of these questions that have been coming through and pose them to you, Laura and Christy here. So Sherry says that that managers can have quarterly meetings to discuss expectations and recognize the employees if they go above and beyond, just like what you both were saying. That's really great. There's a couple of questions here. Jasmine asked, what are the best practices to show employees the value of their total rewards? In other words, how do we show how much the company is spending on things like healthcare and other benefits that aren't as obvious as a pay stub? What are some ways that visibility can be increased? Laura, we'll toss it to you first, and then Christy, I'd love your thoughts.
Well, that's a really great question. I think, this recognition function often does sit in the total reward space. Sometimes it sits in employee experience space. So I personally don't have a ton of experience in benefits myself or compensation directly. But what I've seen is that employees can be given full transparency into the value of their benefits and the value of, you see your compensation on your pay stub, but also, your healthcare benefits and your other intangible benefits. We need to do a really good job of making sure that employees know what's available to them, because oftentimes they're not even aware that these benefits and these things are available to them even exist.
Yeah.
So really being able to communicate and take those opportunities to share that information and reiterate for folks.
Absolutely. Education's a huge part of it. We did a webinar several months ago where I was with a colleague from Awardco, and they mentioned they were more involved in the benefits side of things than I am. And they mentioned that Awardco has a mental health benefit, and I didn't even know about it. And I've been here like 4.5 years. So it's just education,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah, it's easy to overlook all that.
Yeah.
When you don't need it, and then, you might not pay attention to it when you're not really looking for it.
Yep, absolutely. Thank you for that. Christy, what would you add to that? How do we show how much the company is spending on things like healthcare and other benefits that aren't reflected necessarily on a pay stub?
Yeah, I might switch that. I mean, I think there's been a lot of research on all things being even, especially in all this reshuffling. You can have equal pay and benefits, and if you don't feel seen and recognized or connected with the purpose at work, or you don't feel loyalty to your manager, you're going to leave. I've definitely seen people do that. I've seen people leave for lower pay. We also know that lots of times the total rewards conversation focuses on people need more pay, and that's just kind of it's almost like a short dopamine hit. It's a short solve. It doesn't solve for the larger culture. It doesn't solve for long-term retention. And so going back to what you said, Bronson, I really talked a lot, especially with engineers, about there's a correlation. The more you recognize people in a meaningful way, the more likely they are to stay with the company for several years.
Yeah.
So it's good to tell the story of compensation and rewards and benefits, very important. But if you're not walking the walk on the supportive manager recognition, career development, connection side, that's going to fall flat.
Yep, Absolutely. Thank you for that. And thank you all for your continued questions and your comments. We welcome them. We are getting so many, we may not be able to address them all, but I will be happy to receive them and pose them to Christy and Laura, so please keep them coming. And as we dive into this and the employee journey, we're going to start with stage one, which is recruitment. So the best way to find the best people is to use your best resource, your existing employees. When they feel recognized and the culture of their workplace is good, they'll refer their best friends. And the best way to find the best people is just referrals, things like that. So with the employee journey and recruitment, this goes to what you were saying, Christy, about how the outside experience of the employee journey can have a big impact internally. Because if your employees are speaking about their company favorably, they're sharing experiences, that will make people want to join the company. So how can you do that? Social media, you can talk about recognition in interviews. When you're interviewing people, you can talk about your strategy. You can do employee reviews. You can get some good feedback there. You can recognize applicants. Even though they may not be hired, you can still give them a recognition of some kind with a card, or send them an email, something of that effect. So there's a lot of things you can do with this stage of the employee journey. So 71% of employees say that they use referrals from current 71% of employers should say that they use referrals from current employees of an organization to learn about job opportunities. I mean, that's just an incredible resource that I'm sure many people on this webinar already know about and that you're focusing on. So as part of that, a great culture attracts the top 20% of candidates in your hiring pool. This is also from Deloitte. It's an incredible stat. Like it will attract the highest performers. So we want to ask you, how do you recognize during recruitment? Let us know in the chat. But also, Christy and Laura, how are some ways that people can utilize recognition in the recruitment stage and to make that more effective?
Yeah, I had a recent experience in recruitment that really blew me away, and I think it speaks to the culture. I was in interviews and I was moving through the candidate stage, and I got to the top stage and it wasn't a fit. And the recruiter offered to do a feedback session with me. I'm not even moving forward, but I talk about and evangelize that company and tell everyone that I was so impressed with the recruiter and the process and how that went. And I grew from the process. So I think even if you're not bringing those candidates in, like I said earlier, lots of reshuffling, lots of moving around, you never know when someone's going to come back. So I think there's a lot of opportunity in the candidate experience to make people feel valued and seen. And even if it's not the right seat on the bus for them, it might come around later.
Yeah, absolutely. That is an incredible thing. They spent that time. I've never had a recruiter do that.
Right?
That's incredible. And Laura, what about you? What would you add to that? How can leaders recognize during recruitment?
Well, I think about it as, in the context of recognition and building the culture of recognition, right? So if you're doing that inside of your company, and those employees are having a good experience, and to your point, oftentimes the best employees come from referrals, right? So you want employees to be talking about your company, to be referring their friends, but a tangible example of that is the way that your employees can present that culture to those outside of your company. So I recently had an experience where I went and I had a new doctor, and she was lovely. And I told 3 people how lovely this new doctor was. And then I was even inclined to go, onto their Google and write a nice review for them. And so, because of that culture that they're building internally, it's extending, right? And now I'm doing the work for them. I'm writing a great review for them.
Yeah.
I think about it, in that recognition piece. The other thing that I would raise is one of my most memorable experiences as a candidate is when I was hired, and the week before, the manager called me on the phone and just said, "Hey, I just want to give you a call. You're starting next week. I just want you to know how excited I am that you're joining the team, and everyone here is really, excited for you to be here. And I'll see you on your first day after your, onboarding session." And that just blew me away. And I think about it many, many, many years later, and that took all of 5 minutes for that person to do, but it made a huge impact on me. So kind of training your managers and giving them those ideas of how they can recognize folks, and that may be, loosely recognizing, right? Like when we think about recognizing as being so many different ways to recognize, and that experience of being seen as an individual is a really important piece of recognition.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. This leads us to a question from Michael. Should employers actively engage candidates and newly hired to submit feedback to the various sources like Glassdoor? Do you think that would be a valuable resource for even future candidates incoming? What do you both think about that?
Yeah, I've definitely looked at that. I mean, along the candidate journey, there are times where people feel really excited and really motivated. I think it has to be authentic, right? If you're only soliciting feedback when people are excited in that kind of first honeymoon period in a job, and then you're not getting that feedback from people 6, 18, 24 months when that's also very critical. I think it's important to walk the line there. I think that if you're doing it right across the employee journey, you're going to get good feedback on Glassdoor and those external pieces. But you can't just set it up for that outcome. I think you have to make sure you have a really solid culture, and then those external pieces will come.
Yeah, absolutely. The culture leads to those external pieces. Thank you so much. So
one quick add to what Laura said
please.
On the recruitment pieces is thank people for choosing your company, right?
Yeah.
The company didn't just choose the person, but recognize people for making the choice for your company. So I just wanted to add that in.
Yeah. Then that can increase a lot of engagement and just engender a lot of loyalty, right? When you feel like, oh yeah, thank you for thanking me, all that kind of thing. Absolutely. So as we move forward to the employee journey, so we had recruitment, now we go to onboarding. Onboarding can be a host of different strategies and a lot of different things like that, but you can employ recognition at almost every stage of onboarding alone. You can recognize on day one, kind of what we've been talking about. Thank you for joining our company. Thank you for being here. You can recognize at 1 week, 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and that can be a daunting task, especially if you're an HR leader over so many different organizations or thousands of people. But there are ways that you can simplify that for yourself or even automate it. And you can incentivize trainings and compliance, which, as we all know, when you get a new job, you often have to go through a lot of different trainings and things like that. And like we were talking about, it can increase a sense of belonging as team members join in. And now this brings us to a question that was here. It was about peer-to-peer. Michael said, how does peer-to-peer recognition rank in value from the employee's perspective? And I would love both of your thoughts, Christy and Laura, having been in this space for so many years. Where does peer-to-peer land as opposed to manager-to-peer or service awards or something like that? And Laura, if we could start with you, and then Christy, I'd love your thoughts as well.
Sure. It's a great question. I think it's extremely important. I have a difficult time ranking to say one's more important than the other, because I think that, they're all very, very important, particularly manager to employee recognition. But peer-to-peer is very powerful, and that, especially when you're using a platform, right? And Awardco is one platform. I've worked with other recognition platforms as well. I'm a big fan of Awardco in particular, and that solution is really, really flexible and gives lots of, it's just a really powerful solution. But in that type of a platform, it makes peer-to-peer recognition very, very easy and impactful. And so when when folks really get engaged with a recognition platform like that, the manager will be notified when someone else recognizes that person. So it gives more visibility to the manager than they maybe even had before. But yeah, so much to talk about here.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, thank you for bringing all that up. At Awardco, we use our own software, so we recognize and we do things like that. But I often don't know what's going on with my peers or with people that are on my team. But when I see them recognized by one of their peers, I see that. I'm like, oh, isn't that awesome? Like it increases, just engenders a whole host of different things, like you know, encouragement and makes me feel like, oh man, they're just crushing it. You know, it's a really incredible piece of recognition strategies as a whole. Thank you for that. And Christy, what thoughts would you add to the importance of peer-to-peer recognition at all stages, as opposed to maybe another form of recognition?
Sure. One great example from Okta is there were the Ball Bearing Awards, which was an award for people who behind the scenes act as ball bearing, right? They take out the friction. It's the unsung hero. And I think that's what peer-to-peer recognition does, because you have variable manager levels. You have some managers who recognize, some who don't. But if you have a crowdsourced way to figure out who's really making a difference, it could be a security guard who's always helping folks. It could be someone in IT who's always troubleshooting late at night. To uncover those things and to celebrate them and raise them up. And then if you do have the analytics to look at it and then report back to each team. So I know we would send information to the leaders each month, who is doing the most recognizing, so who's doing the thing, them building the muscle, and then who's getting the most recognition. And that's so powerful. When you start to put those dashboards up, you start to raise up the unsung heroes. You also start to focus on what managers are really doing the recognition well.
Yeah, absolutely. That answers a question from Jasmine. How do you measure the success of your programs? Like, there are many different ways. If you use a platform, you can find that. And you said you saw some of that, Christy, is just being able to raise those people up that, or you saw who was recognizing, and did that increase recognition in the organization?
Yeah, those are sort of two questions. We had the dashboards, but we also had very tangible data on the employee engagement survey in both companies where Laura and I have employed successful programs. You see the question, I feel recognized for the work I do, go up substantially on the employee engagement survey. And then, as we all know, that correlates to retention and engagement. So that's when you really start to get a lot of the executives who might have been a little bit more slow to the party. When they see those stats, it really helps you with the business case. But that's later in the stage, right? That's after launch, that's after putting this into play. And that's when you can really take it and run with it and build more programs and campaigns and keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So one question that I want to make sure we address as we move forward here from onboarding and we continue to talk about some of the benefits is, define recognition. Zulema asks us to define recognition. Is it merely about acknowledgement and seeing the person, or is it something more? Does it have certain components to it that make it recognition as we're speaking about it here? What do you both think about that, and how would you define recognition as we're speaking about it?
Laura, you want to take it?
Trying to think of
I should tee that up a little better. Sorry
a good
about
definition. You know, I think it's really about seeing the value, right? It is to the question, like, it is about appreciating the person and the value that they bring to the table, but it's also very specifically recognizing folks for accomplishments, and that can be for big achievements, that could be for a milestone, but really seeing that individual for the value that they're bringing, and recognizing the value that they're delivering to the company.
Yeah, thank you for that. Christine, what would you add to that as far as the definition of recognition?
Well, I would say it has to be a culture of recognition. A platform is great, but it has to be broader than that. So for some people, being able to attend a conference or to be in a high-level meeting or to have a skip level with an SVP, that's recognition. So it's what's the currency that's going to make Bronson or Laura or Christy feel like they're connected to the purpose and they're connected to and making a difference in their job. So I think we are always very careful when we build out the recognition strategy in a company that the platform and especially if it has points or fun monetary things, or it's something where you can buy someone coffee, that's part of it. But it really has to weave through the learning and development, the promotion, the review, the skip level meetings. It has to be holistic.
Yeah, absolutely. And that brings us, I'm going to skip ahead a few here. So we talked about onboarding and the benefits of a good onboarding system and as it relates to recognition. but talking about professional development and how we can continue to support employees and create that culture of recognition reminds me of something that you said, Laura, in that if you aren't supporting employees as they are going through this whole culture of recognition, it can be very difficult to make them feel like, oh, I'm sorry, let me backtrack here. I remembered what I was going to say. When you said that employees need to be recognized in a way that makes them feel important. And this highlights what you just mentioned, Christy, that is it a skip level? Is it being a part of a meeting? Is it something like that? There can be so many different ways to recognize an individual. And what's the best way to know? You can ask them, and you can even send out a survey. Whatever it is to get that information can be so helpful as you design your recognition platforms or your recognition strategy, as you mentioned there, Christy. So, and you can do it throughout the employee journey. So we've talked about retention, we've talked about onboarding. We're going to talk about professional development now and how you can incentivize that. You can incentivize to develop new skills, you can recognize high achievement, provide opportunities for growth. All of these are forms of recognition that can be incredibly powerful because the employee will feel valued as they are more and more invested in. They have opportunities to contribute, to grow, to participate. And there are many different benefits to this. It can lead to 86% or 15% more engagement, 34% higher retention. And these stats are from Harvard Business Review. So these are very similar to the ones we spoke about earlier from Deloitte and Gallup, but they're from a different study from HBR. So the main point is that recognition at every stage can help with retention, it can help with engagement, it can just provide so many different benefits to that. And can you afford not to provide professional development? Let's talk about that for a second. 92% of employees, this is a study from Deloitte, are more likely to develop novel products and processes for your organization if they're given professional development opportunities. 52% more productivity, 56% more likely to be first to market, 17% more profitable than their peers. I wonder if in your careers you've seen this, and Christy, we'll start with you. Have you seen benefits similar to this as recognition has been provided in the form of professional development to recognize individuals either for participating in it or incentivizing them to do so?
Yes, I think that some of the traditional ways one could do it, right, to recognize people for completing something or giving them a badge or recognizing someone in a meeting, I think that works really well. But I also think there are opportunities that are a little more creative. So Laura and I have put together ambassador programs for people who are really passionate about recognition. And the great thing about this is sometimes they're VPs, sometimes they're executive assistants, sometimes they're in a small office in Australia. But if you gather the people who are really good at this activity and you incentivize them and give them opportunities. So we gave these folks opportunities to give out more points. We gave them opportunities to have more swag. We gave them opportunities to do public speaking and make videos. So professional development could be sort of ancillary things that they're doing to promote the culture and be culture ambassadors, maybe going out and speaking outside of work. I think we need to sort of broaden what professional development is. It's that really important skill building. And I think recognition is a great way to find those people who you might lose if they don't have something. They're shooting stars. They want something else to do and bring them into building the program. Because for all of the HR leaders out there, if you're trying to do this with one or two people, it takes a lot more people to build a robust recognition program.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've never thought of professional development as anything beyond the traditional you learn something new. But that is really incredible that it can be something ancillary to that, like you mentioned. Thank you for that. Laura, I wonder what you would say about that as well. What would you add to that conversation?
Yeah, I would say, in addition to using professional development as a recognition, right? Like as a, hey, you did a great job on this. I would love for you to take this course or go to this conference. I mean, that can be a recognition. There's so many ways to recognize. The other thing, though, that I would say around professional development is giving your managers the skills to recognize and do it well. Christy and I have worked in the past with Dr. Bob Nelson, who is an expert in recognition. He did his PhD around why managers don't recognize, and often because they don't know how, they don't have the tools. So really why we may many people may think like it's simple, but really teaching and giving them the steps, right? Like you could have, a tip card of here's how you recognize. You could share phrases. You could share, Christy and I, again, have built recognition courses at different companies, and we were always actually pleasantly, but surprised how many people would sign up and come to a course or a webinar around recognition, because it's simple, but at the same time, it's not simple, right? The skills that we can learn. And so we can teach those skills to our managers. And as here, the stat about what a difference a manager can.
I think we might have lost Laura for a second, but as she was saying, you can teach managers and teach people how to recognize. And that's such an incredible skill, so beneficial to be able to do that. And we'll move forward here because we want to be respectful of time and everyone's time here, but the employee journey and engagement and how you can do that. So this kind of touches on what we've been talking about holistically. Engagement is something that can happen at every stage of the employee journey. You can be engaged in your onboarding, etc. But there can often be a little bit of a slump after someone is brought in and that honeymoon period is, as they say, is perhaps over. It can be hard to maintain that recognition over time. So this highlights what you were talking about earlier, Christy, in that it's difficult, it can be difficult to recognize frequently, but it's so key to do that. And I wonder, what are some ways that you've seen organizations you've worked with or that you've helped stand up a recognition program to recognize frequently and to provide this engagement throughout the journey?
Well, I think the piece about this is a lot of people set it and forget it, right? They launch a recognition program and they think they're done. And I think that's just the beginning. And I think this is where Laura has been extremely creative in building campaigns around Employee Appreciation Day and being thankful and things that go out to LinkedIn. I mean, I think I'll kick to her for some of that, because I think that keeping it aloft is one of the most critical pieces that a lot of companies just don't build in. They said, well, let's get a vendor, let's set it and forget it, but that's just the beginning. So maybe Laura, is there anything you want to highlight about the creative programs to keep that recognition spirit alive?
Yeah, I think there's lots of different opportunities. I mean, we've built campaigns for different companies, as you head into the holidays, head into the new year, really thinking about, you can tie that in with a campaign around recognition. Or in March, there's Employee Appreciation Day. That's a great opportunity to tie a campaign in around recognition. So, it can be a lot of fun, and just as a way to continue to raise the visibility of it. I think the other way is to really build those partnerships. So as you're building a recognition program, you really need to have those partnerships across the organization. And so really leaning on those folks to be champions of the program. If you set it up well, you're working with your compensation team, compliance, travel and expense, audit, payroll, right? Like you have this core group of people who are really bought into the program. Then as you go along, involving ERGs, right? Giving them the ability to have special ways of recognizing. So, it's just a really important aspect to really understand that it's not going to sustain itself.
Yeah.
You have to really nurture it.
Absolutely. And there's so many different ways you can do that. Like you mentioned, some of those creative campaigns or creative recognition programs that people can create, that HR leaders can create. Here, I skipped ahead a few slides because this is very pertinent to what you mentioned there, Laura and Christy. Timeline of recognition. So this is just a little bit of an infographic where you can see that it's very difficult to recognize frequently unless you have a little bit of assistance, either in the form of a platform or a team that can help you do that. So you can recognize for onboarding, employee appreciation days in March, just like you mentioned, Laura, people's birthdays, employees' birthdays, or life events, or holidays, or service milestones, and then you can have peer-to-peer and what we call spot recognition in between all of those. And even just with a few programs, you can overcome, or you can do more than what you were ever doing before. And you can automate a lot of those too. It doesn't have to be a continued someone constantly managing it, although it can be helpful to do that. But in our experience in the Awardco platform, we've seen with some of our clients before they came here that they recognized employees on average less than twice a year. And now that may not be entirely accurate, because they may not have been counting, just a conversation where they said great job, or they invited them into a meeting or whatever. But generally, the best practice is to recognize for a service anniversary and maybe a holiday. And I've worked at places that did that, and that's good. If you're doing that, that's good. We're not saying that that's bad, but there's so much opportunity out there for you, like you mentioned, Laura, that to do those creative programs and to make that work. And it's imperative that you do so, because there are so many benefits. Like, we'll bounce back here. Recognition at every stage of the employee journey provides 4x engagement. That's from Gallup. Now, 4x is a lot. Like, that is an incredible amount of engagement. But even if you got a little bit of engagement from your remote employees, from your dispersed teams, from the people that are on site, things like that, it could unify and help create that culture of engagement that you're looking for. And as we kind of wrap this up, please continue to ask questions to Laura and Christy, and we'll do that. But there is a question here that I want to pose to both of you. It's from Heidi. November is Gratitude Month, and a wonderful opportunity to recognize your gratitude. And that's an incredible point. Like, what are some ways that holidays can be a specific driver of recognition that you've seen in the organizations you've worked with? Laura, we'll start with you, and then Christy, I'd love your input as well.
Yeah, so, I would just say that building recognition campaigns around those types of events can be really impactful. At the same time, I would encourage folks to be just thoughtful and cautious about it too. I've worked at several large global organizations, and so here in the US, of course, we think about November as Thanksgiving and gratitude, right? And that's important, but not everybody celebrates that. But in thinking about, well, globally, kind of there's lots of typically holidays at the end of the year, and we're coming on a new year. So we can really kind of just loosely frame that, right? Like, hey, think thanks, or think, you can come up with a campaign, and think thanks is one that we've implemented before, in taking thanks and making that an acronym, and assigning kind of different types of recognition tasks to those letters, and kind of making it a challenge. That's a fun campaign to do, but just being careful not to, especially if you're a global organization, just being careful not to make it too centered around, say, Thanksgiving specifically. So just calling that out.
Yeah, great feedback. Thank you. Christy, would you add anything to that?
I would just say holidays are great, but as companies, we need to tie it into the big projects and the big value drivers for the company. So I think that any leader who's putting together a big project wants to think about those points along the project where they want to thank people. So if they hit a milestone, take a moment, take a pause, thank people for that. It's going to help them feel like they've succeeded in something, give them that energy, some discretionary effort to get to the next milestone. So we're too late sometimes and too little. We wait, and then we have a happy hour, and then we're on to the next project. Really working that muscle and weaving it through to make sure you recognize people along the way. You also don't forget people that way, and you make sure that the project will move forward. Yeah, absolutely. Thank you both for those comments. That's very insightful. As we wrap up our time here, we want to thank everyone who's been here, but I want to give you each, Laura and Christy, an opportunity to have some last words about recognition and about engagement, and how it can really impact culture, or whatever you might say about that to the people here on the webinar to help them in their own work. Christy, we'll start with you. Sure. I would say it's hard to know where all of you are on your journey of either tuning up a recognition program or looking at launching one or making it better. But I think one thing that's really crucial is whoever you have in that role, the team you have in that role, has to be true believers. I think what's made Laura and me so successful in this program is that we deeply believe in recognition. We practice it. We've seen how transformative it is, and we have a lot of energy around that. So as you think about who to put on the team to launch a program like Awardco or launch a recognition program and think about all of the pieces of it, choose someone who really is willing to be at the front of the line and walk the walk.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Laura, what would you say?
Yeah, I 100% agree with Christy, and I would just say that, when it comes to recognition, you will run into naysayers, right? You'll run into people that doesn't really matter. I don't need to recognize people for just doing their job, and this is fluffy stuff. But it's when you have the data, you have this data that Bronson shared. It's not fluffy, right? It really does make an impact. It helps people be more engaged with the company, feel a sense of belonging with the company. There is really a lot of value in doing recognition well. So, and plus it can just be a lot of fun. I mean, when I'm working in the recognition space, it just feels like you get to be, I don't know, the fairy godmother or something. It's people give really positive feedback about how impactful it is for them to receive that recognition.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you both so much for your comments and for your guidance and your leadership in this area. And thank you all for attending this webinar. We want to let you know that you can find this webinar on demand. You'll get a copy of the slides, and we'll toss it back to Amberly from HRE to kind of close us out. Thank you.